Okay, so here's the thing. Israel is facing some of the most intense threats in recent memory. Rockets, militant groups, and even political pressure from nations around the world, all converging at once. And yet, somehow, Israel is being protected in ways that seem almost impossible, like miracles unfolding right before our eyes. You know, things that make you step back and go, wait, how is this even happening? Stick around, because the full story behind these events is wild and truly eye-opening. Alright, so let's dive into the situation Israel is facing, and honestly, it's intense. Israel isn't just dealing with random conflicts here and there. There's a very real, very determined effort by multiple groups and nations to, well, basically erase Israel from the map. I mean, it's not about dominating Israel or negotiating a compromise. Their goal is total eradication. Groups like Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and even other countries around Israel are all pushing toward the same end. And here's the kicker, they're not subtle about it. They've been openly planning and firing rockets, coordinating attacks, and using political channels to try to isolate Israel globally. Now, to really understand how shocking this is, you have to look at what's happening on the international stage, especially at the United Nations. So picture this, every year, all the nations in the world gather at the UN in New York, right? Heads of state, prime ministers, presidents, everybody comes together to, theoretically, talk about peace and international cooperation. But the reality is, when it comes to Israel, it's often a completely different story. After the October 7th attacks, there wasn't a single day without rockets being fired at Israel. Yet what was the first resolution introduced at the UN? Brace yourself. It was a resolution by the Palestinians demanding that every Jew leave their own land, including key areas like Judea, Samaria, Eastern Jerusalem, and even the Western Wall. And they set this insane deadline, 12 months. Not only that, but they demanded that all nations stop supplying Israel with weapons and ammunition. Essentially, they were calling for complete annihilation, just outright saying it in the international forum. And wait, here's the part that really makes your head spin. Out of 194 nations at the UN, only 14 voted no on this resolution. 14? The United States was one of them, which, sure, looks good on paper. But here's the weird part, being against it didn't really stop the resolution from moving forward because, let's be honest, the UN depends heavily on US funding to even operate. If the US really wanted to take a stand, they could have pulled funding and made a serious statement, but that didn't happen. So, it's like a wink-wink, nod-nod situation. Officially no, but in practice, the resolution still sends a powerful message against Israel. Crazy, right? And that's not the end of it. Later that same year, in the third week of September, the UN did something that, again, just shows how tangled this whole thing is. They passed another resolution, which actually violated a biblical prophecy from Joel 3:2. According to that prophecy, in the last days, God will bring all nations to a valley of decision, where they'll be judged based on how they treated Zion and Israel. And this resolution, it literally divided the land, scattered the people, and cheapened the Jewish way of life. It was, in every sense, a total fail on the world stage. But here's the twist. The following Sunday, the UN went even further. They adopted what they called the Pact for the Future, which wasn't even voted on. It was pre-negotiated and slammed through with a gavel. This pact gave the UN Secretary General nearly unlimited power to declare a global crisis and essentially act as a world authority. Think about that for a second, a kind of global government mechanism that hasn't existed in 5,000 years. That's a lot to unpack, and it's all happening right now while Israel is under attack. And then, if you layer in US foreign policy, it gets even more complicated. During the Obama years, the US actually gave billions of dollars to Iran, $4 billion straight up without Congress authorizing it, and then lifted sanctions, letting them access another $150 billion. And what did Iran do with all that money? They funded Hezbollah, Hamas, and all these terrorist proxy organizations surrounding Israel. Essentially, money meant for terror operations, and it didn't stop there. Even under the current Biden-Harris administration, billions are flowing to these same groups. Now, during the Trump years, there was a 4-year window where these funds weren't flowing and things were relatively quiet. But as soon as the current administration came in, the money started moving again and attacks ramped up. It's like turning the faucet back on for terrorism, and Israel is right there in the middle of it. So, putting all of this together, the military threats from Hamas and Hezbollah, the political pressure from nations at the UN, and even the indirect support of Israel's enemies through US foreign policy, you start to realize just how intense and multi-layered this situation is. Israel is surrounded, under fire, and facing some of the most hostile international dynamics in history. And yet, here's the thing, right? Despite all of this, Israel is still standing, still defending itself, still managing to counteract these threats in ways that seem almost miraculous. And that's what makes this story so wild. The combination of relentless threats, global politics, and a population somehow surviving and pushing back. And the best part? Understanding this context helps you see why Israel's current situation isn't just another news story. It's part of a much bigger picture, both politically and, some might argue, spiritually. The enemies are clear, the goals are clear, and the world's response has been shocking, inconsistent, and frankly, eye-opening. And honestly, if you don't see it, you might not understand the full weight of what Israel is facing. But now you do. So, as we keep going, you'll see how all of these threats, international decisions, and historical pressures intersect to create the high-stakes reality that Israel is navigating today. Okay, so now let's talk about US foreign policy and how it's been affecting Israel, because honestly, it's kind of wild when you really look at it. I mean, a lot of people hear about rockets and attacks, but the financial and political side of things often gets overlooked, and that's a huge part of the story. So, starting with the Obama years, this is where things start to get really complicated. During that time, the US actually sent billions of dollars to Iran. Not a small amount, but $4 billion just given directly. And that's not counting the $150 billion they were allowed to access after sanctions were lifted. Yeah, you heard that right. Billions of dollars flowing to a country that's widely recognized as the world's top state sponsor of terrorism. Now, when you hear that, you might be thinking, wait, why would the US do that? Well, the explanation at the time was mostly diplomatic, trying to get Iran to comply with nuclear agreements and reduce tensions. But here's the problem, right? That money didn't just sit in a bank account. Iran used it to fund Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and all these proxy organizations that are constantly launching attacks on Israel. So, effectively, US money ended up directly fueling the very groups that are trying to destroy Israel. And if you imagine it, it's almost surreal, like you're giving someone a gift, and they're using it to build weapons against your friend. That's kind of what happened. I was actually following this pretty closely at the time because I was serving on the intelligence committee, and it was clear how direct the connection was. Iran was in a tight spot financially before the payments. Their economy was struggling, and their leadership was at risk of losing power. Then boom, this infusion of billions. Suddenly they could keep their operations running, fund terror groups, and really escalate attacks. And as you might expect, Israel didn't just sit back. They were under constant threat, and this funding made the threat worse. Rockets, tunnels, missile stockpiles. It all ramped up dramatically after those funds started flowing. And it's not just the Obama administration. The current administration, Biden and Harris, has, in many ways, continued similar policies. Some people might say it's a continuation, some might argue there are differences, but the result is strikingly similar. Sanctions were eased again, money has flowed into Iran, and those same terrorist proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, have had the resources to keep attacking Israel. During the Trump years, there was a 4-year period where this pipeline was cut off. Sanctions were back in place, and interestingly, attacks from these groups were lower, because once the current administration came in, funding resumed, and attacks ramped up again. So there's a very direct correlation between the flow of money and the intensity of attacks. Now, some people will argue, oh, it's more complicated than that. And sure, international relations always are, but when you're looking at the numbers, the timing, and the outcomes, the connection is hard to ignore. This isn't just theory, it's been documented and observed in real time. And from Israel's perspective, it feels like the world is kind of stacked against them. On one hand, they're defending themselves militarily every day, and on the other, the very money meant to maintain peace ends up empowering their enemies. It's a tough spot, and it's really hard to convey just how intense it is unless you follow the details closely. And here's the part that makes it even more frustrating to watch. The groups receiving the funds aren't subtle. Hezbollah, for instance, has been stockpiling rockets in Lebanon for decades. Hamas in Gaza is constantly ready with attacks. So, every time money flows to Iran, it's not just theoretical aid, it's enabling active operations against Israel. And because of that, Israel's defense systems, like the Iron Dome, have to be constantly on high alert. Every rocket launch could be life-threatening, and yet, the financial backing that keeps these attacks happening often comes from indirect international decisions. It's also worth noting that this isn't just about military hardware. The funds Iran receives also go into infrastructure for these groups, building tunnels, supplying ammunition, training militants, and keeping the leadership in power. That means Israel has to deal with an enemy that isn't just motivated ideologically, they're empowered financially, strategically, and politically, and that's a really unique kind of pressure. It's not just a border skirmish, it's a full-scale threat that's been sustained over years, partly because of external support, and if you step back and think about it, it's mind-blowing. Imagine a country trying to survive under constant threat, knowing that some of the money fueling the attacks is coming from international agreements and policies that are supposed to be about peace. That's the reality Israel has been facing, and it makes every defense, every countermeasure, and every success against these attacks feel like a small miracle. It's a combination of incredible strategic planning, advanced technology, and, for many observers, a sense of divine protection that they've been able to withstand so much for so long. So, yeah. U.S. Foreign policy has played a massive role in shaping the current situation in Israel. The Obama-era payments, the lifting of sanctions, the continuation under Biden-Harris, all of it ties directly into why attacks have been able to escalate. And when you combine that with the threats from Hamas, Hezbollah, and other proxies, you start to get a picture of just how precarious things really are. It's not just geopolitics, it's life and death on a daily basis. And it's happening under the watchful eye of the international community, which, well, sometimes seems unwilling or unable to take decisive action. So, as we move forward and look at the events happening in Israel right now, you can see that it's not just isolated incidents. It's a complex web of history, international politics, financial flows, and ongoing attacks. And understanding the US role, both past and present, is key to really grasping why the situation is so tense and why Israel has to remain vigilant every single day. It's a lot to process, but it's crucial to see how deeply interconnected these policies and attacks are and how they shape the reality on the ground for Israel today. Alright, so now we get to the part that honestly is almost hard to believe, but it really happened. Israel has been facing an intense barrage of attacks, especially from Hezbollah in Lebanon, but somehow, things that seem impossible have been happening in real time. First off, Hezbollah had stockpiled around 200,000 rockets over more than 25 years. Imagine that, 200,000 rockets aimed at Israel, just sitting there, ready to go. And in just about 5 or 6 days, Israel managed to neutralize nearly 100,000 of them. Yes, you heard that right. Half of this massive arsenal gone in less than a week. And this isn't something that's been exaggerated. It's been verified by multiple credible sources. I mean, for decades, nobody even thought it was possible. And yet, here we are. And it wasn't just rockets being destroyed in some generic sense. Israel was able to take out mid-level terrorists, the operational heads within Hezbollah, and even some of the top command structures. Basically, they disabled the whole machinery that would have been used to launch attacks. So, what that means in practical terms is that the people who were running these operations, coordinating the attacks, supplying the rockets, were suddenly out of the picture. And it didn't stop there. Even the top leadership, like the head of Hezbollah, known as Nasrallah, was targeted. His entire command structure was disrupted, and replacements were eliminated as well. Down to the mid-range leaders, the same thing happened. It's like a domino effect. You remove the leaders, and the system starts collapsing from the top down. And this wasn't just luck. It required precise intelligence, careful planning, and honestly, a bit of awe when you see it all come together. Now, on top of all that, there's the matter of civilians. Despite all these attacks, despite the rockets flying in from Lebanon and the constant threat of chaos, not a single Israeli was killed by some of these barrages. The defense systems, like the Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems, all work together in perfect synchronization. And this is the kicker. The manufacturers themselves don't even guarantee that these systems would operate this flawlessly. Yet, they did. Rockets that could have caused mass casualties were intercepted mid-air or allowed to land in unpopulated areas. Sand, water, empty fields. These missiles fell harmlessly and lives were spared. And you know, when you hear the reports from secular Israelis, even those who aren't religious, some of them were saying, this is biblical, this is miraculous. And they're not exaggerating. Seeing a defense system work that effectively under such extreme conditions is almost surreal. But it's not just defensive measures. Israel was proactive as well. They conducted raids into southern Lebanon, and what they found was chilling. Hidden tunnels, rockets, explosives, shoulder-fired missiles, everything needed for a large-scale attack was there. In fact, there was a plan for what could have been another October 7th level assault, potentially targeting the Galilee and northern Israel. But thanks to intelligence, preparation, and yes, what many describe as divine intervention, Israel discovered these plans before they could be executed. The entire operation was thwarted, and disaster was avoided. It's almost like Israel stumbled onto a ticking time bomb and disarmed it just in time. And honestly, if you pause and think about it, that's not just impressive militarily, it's staggering in terms of what was actually prevented. And then there's Iran. On October 1st, Iran launched over 200 precision ballistic missiles at Israel. For context, these are not your average rockets. They're massive, long-range, highly accurate missiles. Historically, no nation has fired this many missiles at another nation at once. But once again, Israel's defense systems, combined with strategic planning and a bit of luck, managed to intercept the vast majority of these missiles. The few that did get through landed in unpopulated areas. No deaths, no major injuries, minimal damage. And it's not just statistics, it's real people walking through their day, looking at the aftermath, and realizing they survived something unprecedented. That's mind-blowing if you let it sink in. And alongside these events, God's hand seems evident to many observers. After attacks were intensified by Hezbollah, instead of Israel being overwhelmed, they pushed back decisively. Thousands of mid-level terrorists were neutralized, communication networks were disrupted, and the command chains were decimated. The sheer scale and speed of these successes feel almost impossible when you consider the years of preparation Hezbollah had put into these attacks. And it's not just isolated groups. This applies to Iran's top leadership in some cases as well, like the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds Force. Key figures, high-level leaders, and strategists who could have escalated the conflict were suddenly removed from the equation. The balance of power shifted dramatically in days, and what makes this even more astonishing is that all of this took place during a critical period in Israel's religious calendar. Around the same time, tens of thousands of Jewish people were returning to their faith in large numbers, visiting the Western Wall, repenting, and seeking God's protection. The timing of these spiritual events alongside the military miracles adds a layer of significance for many who follow these developments. People are witnessing what they see as extraordinary intervention, not just military precision, but almost a perfect alignment of events that has allowed Israel to survive and even push back against overwhelming threats. And you know, when you consider the scope of all these events together, the neutralization of half of Hezbollah's rocket arsenal in just days, the interception of over 200 ballistic missiles, the discovery of terrorist tunnels and plans before they could be used, the elimination of top terrorist leaders, and the protection of civilians, it's almost like a real-life story that feels larger than life. And the reactions of Israelis, both secular and religious, underline just how profound these events have been. Some see it as strategic genius, some see it as miracles, and many see a combination of both. Either way, it's an extraordinary period in Israel's history. So, as we're looking at all of this, it becomes clear that Israel is not just surviving by chance. There's an intricate web of intelligence, technology, strategy, and what many would describe as divine protection. And in the middle of all this, ordinary people continue with their lives, despite the threats raining down. That's incredible to watch. It's a mix of awe, relief, and honestly, a sense that something bigger is at play. And it's hard not to reflect on that when you see how many lives were spared, how many attacks were stopped, and how Israel managed to counteract a network of threats that had been decades in the making. In the end, these events neutralized rockets, thwarted attacks, intercepted missiles, eliminated terrorist leadership, and civilians remaining safe paint a picture of resilience, precision, and, for many, divine intervention. It's a story of survival against overwhelming odds, and the level of coordination, courage, and perhaps providence involved is staggering. And this is just one chapter of what's happening now, yet it already reads like a tale that could only exist in real life, combining modern military technology with almost miraculous outcomes, all unfolding in real time right before the eyes of the world. Alright, so let's take a step back for a minute and talk about something that's, well, really fascinating, Psalm 83. Now, this isn't just an old song or a piece of poetry from centuries ago. It's actually a prophetic text that seems to line up eerily well with what's happening today in Israel. So, Psalm 83 was written by Asaph, who wasn't just any musician. He was a Levite, part of the priestly line, appointed during King David's time as one of the chief musicians in the temple. And, interestingly, he's referred to as a seer in the scriptures, basically a prophet. So when he writes this psalm, it's not just music, it's prophecy. The psalm itself describes a confederation of nations coming against Israel. It talks about Edom, the Ishmaelites, Moab, the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, and even Tyre and Assyria. And at the time, these were real regions and peoples that surrounded Israel. But here's where it gets interesting. If you map these ancient regions to today's geography, you start seeing some serious parallels. Edom, Moab, and Ammon are basically what we think of as Jordan today, while Philistia corresponds to Gaza, Tyre is part of Lebanon, and Assyria stretches across modern-day Syria, Iraq, and even parts of Iran. And when you put it all together, it looks almost like a blueprint of modern Arab Muslim states surrounding Israel. Now, Asaph isn't just listing enemies for the sake of drama. He's describing a real coalition, a confederation of 10 groups that conspire against Israel. And he's writing this as a prayer too, asking God to frustrate their plans, to confuse them, and to protect Israel. What's so wild is that if you look at what's happening today, the alliances, the proxy groups, the coordinated attacks, it's almost like history repeating itself. You have nations and groups conspiring, rockets being launched, and attacks coordinated in a way that mirrors the psalm in a modern context. It's uncanny. And then there's the story of Ishmael and Isaac, which is actually a key piece of the puzzle. Abraham was promised a son through Sarah in his old age, Isaac, who would carry on the covenant and eventually the lineage that leads to the Messiah. But before Isaac was born, Abraham and Sarah got impatient and had a child through Hagar, their servant, and that was Ishmael. Now, I don't know about you, but patience has never been my strong suit either, so I get it. But the thing is, Ishmael's descendants and Isaac's descendants ended up on opposing sides historically, which, in the bigger picture, explains a lot about the ongoing conflict. The descendants of Ishmael grew into the Arab peoples, while Isaac's line became the Jewish people. And yes, centuries later, this tension has evolved into the complex, ongoing conflicts we see in the Middle East today. What's fascinating is that Asaph is essentially giving us both a historical account and a prophetic lens. He's chronicling these confederations and showing that even in ancient times, there were groups determined to eradicate Israel. And when you see modern Hamas, Hezbollah, and other groups aligned with various state actors, it almost feels like the prophecy is echoing in real life. And here's the thing, he even names regions specifically. Edom and Moab, for instance, are peaceful with Israel today, especially Jordan, thanks to the 1994 peace treaty. But the other regions, Philistia, Tyre, Assyria, that's where the tension still exists, just like Asaph described. So when you read Psalm 83, it's more than just a song of lament. It's a strategic warning and a prayer. Asaph is basically saying, Lord, these enemies are conspiring, they're plotting, they want to wipe out your people, but I'm putting my trust in you. And what's cool is how human he keeps it. He's frustrated, anxious, worried, But he turns all of that into a prayer that asks for God's intervention first. Not revenge. It's like he's saying, I know they're out to get us, but God, win them over to you if you can before anything else happens. There's a humility in that which is really remarkable, and it's something we can learn from even today. And the parallels with today don't stop at geography or prophecy. They also extend to the nature of the conflict. The psalm speaks of enemies consulting together with one mind, forming a confederacy. Might sound familiar? It's essentially what we see now with coalitions of militant groups and state actors who coordinate politically and militarily against Israel. Asaph even notes that they want to cut Israel off from being a nation and to take possession of what he calls the pastures of God. Fast forward to today, and we see that same intent echoed in modern rhetoric from various groups that don't want Israel to exist as a sovereign Jewish state. And here's another layer, the way Asaph frames his prayer. He doesn't start with vengeance or destruction. He goes through the frustration. He acknowledges the threat, but his first plea is for the enemies to seek the Lord. That's profound. Even as he lays out the reality of existential threat, the psalm ends with hope, a spiritual vision that transcends the conflict. And when you look at Israel today, amidst all the violence, rocket attacks, and political maneuvering, there are still people turning back to God, seeking divine protection, and even praying for the salvation of those who are opposed to them. It's a reflection of the psalm in action, which is just wow. And the storytelling gets richer when you consider Asaph's background. He wasn't just a prophet, he was a musician, one of the chief temple musicians appointed by King David. So these psalms were originally songs meant to be sung by the Levites in worship. In temple ceremonies, music has a way of embedding memory and emotion, and you can see that in the text. It's not cold, clinical history, it's lived experience, prophetic insight, and worship all wrapped together. And the fact that these songs still speak to events thousands of years later is pretty mind-blowing. It's like the past is reaching forward to comment on the present. And then, connecting back to Ishmael and Isaac, it adds a deeply human element, the impatience of Abraham and Sarah, the unintended consequences of human decisions, and the long-term ripple effects all serve as a reminder that history isn't just a set of dates and battles. It's a story of people, choices, and divine plans intersecting. The tension between the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac has played out for centuries, but Psalm 83 frames it as part of a larger spiritual narrative, and when you put it alongside the current geopolitical realities, it gives a perspective that's both historical and profoundly contemporary. So, in the end, Psalm 83 isn't just some ancient text, it's a lens through which we can view current events. Asaph's writing captures the essence of existential threat, the strategy of enemies, and the hope that comes from faith in God. And the parallels to today are striking. The Confederation of Nations, the ongoing attacks from groups that trace their heritage to Ishmael, and the geographical echoes of ancient regions all point to a continuity that's hard to ignore. It's a story of warning, lament, and hope, all woven together in music, prophecy, and history. And if you read it carefully, you realize that the psalm isn't just about Israel being under attack, it's about understanding the nature of conflict, the human tendency to conspire against others, and the ultimate hope for redemption and protection through faith. Asaph's voice, though ancient, speaks to us today in ways that feel remarkably relevant. It's both sobering and inspiring, and it really makes you think about how history, prophecy, and current events can intertwine in ways that are almost eerie. But at the same time, it's a story that offers perspective, grounding, and for those who see it, a reason for hope. Okay, so let's talk about the whole two-state solution idea, because honestly, it's been tried, tested, and, well, proven not to work the way people hoped. Here's the thing, the idea sounds simple on paper, right? Israel on one side, a Palestinian state on the other, and everyone coexisting peacefully. But wait, can you believe this? History shows it's never actually played out that way. Take Gaza, for instance. In 2005, Israel completely evacuated the Gaza Strip. They removed 9,000 Israeli settlers from 21 communities, handed control over to the Palestinians, and basically said, "Here, make this work." It was a real-life experiment in a two-state solution. And what happened? Just 2 years later, in 2007, the Palestinians voted Hamas into power. And suddenly, everything changed. Hamas didn't want coexistence. They wanted total control and the destruction of Israel. That's the reality check. The two-state solution wasn't about peace. It was about giving land and hope to groups that didn't want peace at all. Now, some people will say, oh, but Hamas is just one group. Surely a legitimate Palestinian state could coexist. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The truth is, there's already another Palestinian state historically, right? After World War I, the League of Nations, by mandate, appointed territory in the Middle East, including what we now know as Israel and Jordan. Great Britain took that territory and divided it, giving Jews their ancient homeland back. But the eastern side of the Jordan River was given to what became Transjordan, today's Jordan. And get this, today, Jordan's population is about 11 to 12 million, and roughly 60% are of Palestinian descent. So, in other words, there's already a Palestinian state that exists, Jordan, and yet, some people still push for more land as a solution. The thing is, this isn't about land anymore. It's about the eradication of Israel, and incremental concessions don't fix that fundamental goal. Here's another historical twist: the Balfour Declaration in 1917 and the subsequent 1923 adjustments by the British. The Jews were originally promised a larger territory, but pressure from oil-rich Arab nations led Britain to redraw the lines, giving 2/3 of the land to Jordan and leaving a smaller portion for Israel. So even before modern conflicts, there was compromise, negotiation, and frankly, injustice in terms of promised land. Yet, Israel survived, and the Palestinian state that exists now was only partially realized. And the idea that giving more land or trying again with a two-state solution would suddenly create peace. History suggests otherwise. Now, let's go back to Gaza for a moment, because it's a perfect case study. Israel pulls out completely in 2005, right? They leave everything behind, homes, infrastructure, and control, and basically hand it over. And here's the kicker. Instead of peace, the area becomes a base for Hamas, which consolidates power and uses the territory to launch attacks. So the two-state solution, in practice, ended up strengthening one of the groups that wants to destroy Israel. And this isn't theoretical, it's documented, clear, and honestly, quite shocking when you think about it. It's like giving someone the keys to a house and then realizing they're going to use it as a base for hostile operations against you. And here's another layer. People often don't realize the geopolitical and historical complexities that make the two-state solution fundamentally flawed. There's a reason why Israel, after years of negotiations and withdrawals, still has to maintain security and vigilance. The neighboring states, the various militant groups, and even international politics create a situation where any land concession is immediately tested, challenged, or outright exploited. And let's be real, anyone who thinks a two-state solution would magically solve the conflict is, at best, optimistic and, at worst, naive. And it gets even more tangled when you factor in the demographics and historical claims. As I mentioned, Jordan already has a large population of Palestinians. So in a sense, a Palestinian state exists and has existed for decades. Meanwhile, Gaza and the West Bank are controlled by different political entities, each with varying levels of autonomy, governance, and support from outside powers. And the thing is, these divisions don't lead to peace. They often lead to infighting, strategic power plays, and continued hostility toward Israel. So giving more land or proposing a state in theory doesn't address the root issues: ideology, intent, and historical grievances. So here's the big picture. Attempts at a two-state solution fail because they assume that providing land and sovereignty is enough to create peace. But it's not. The fundamental conflict is about existence and recognition. Israel's enemies have historically sought to eliminate the Jewish state entirely, and no incremental concession has ever changed that goal. The Gaza evacuation was a perfect example. Even when Israel acted in good faith, the result wasn't cooperation. It was hostility and consolidation of power by groups like Hamas. And yes, while there are moderate Palestinians who do seek peace, the governing powers and influential factions have consistently rejected coexistence in practice. And when you look at the broader history, that's from the Balfour Declaration to modern negotiations, the pattern is clear. Concessions and land adjustments do not change the underlying conflict. It's not about territory alone, it's about whether one side accepts the existence of the other. That's why history is so instructive here, because it's not just theoretical, it's been tested multiple times with the same fundamental outcomes. So, what's the takeaway? The two-state solution, as appealing as it sounds on paper, doesn't solve the core issue. The fundamental conflict is ideological, existential, and historically entrenched. Land transfers or political agreements are only effective if both sides genuinely want peace. And history shows that the governing powers in Palestinian territories have not met that condition. From the Gaza evacuation to the rise of Hamas, to the existence of a Palestinian state in Jordan, the evidence is clear. Incremental steps do not satisfy the ultimate goals of Israel's adversaries. And that's why, when people suggest, oh, just give them more land and there'll be peace, it's important to pause and think, does that actually address the root of the conflict? Historically, the answer is no. Israel has made concessions, pulled out of territories, and tried to negotiate, and yet attacks continue. Hostility persists, and security concerns remain paramount. The two-state solution might sound neat in theory, but the reality is that it has been tried, tested, and has repeatedly failed to create the lasting peace it promises. That's the hard truth, and understanding it is key to grasping the modern geopolitical landscape in the region. Alright, so here's the really fascinating part about Psalm 83 that often gets overlooked. Most people focus on the enemies, the plots, the threats, because, well, that's dramatic and intense. And yes, Asaph does pray for Israel's protection, for God to frustrate the plans of these nations, to confuse them, and to safeguard the people. But here's the twist. If you read the psalm closely, the primary focus isn't destruction or revenge at all. Asaph's first and deepest prayer is for the hearts of the enemies. He's asking God to turn them toward himself, to seek him before any judgment even comes. Pause for a second and think about that. It's not, Lord, destroy them. First, it's, Lord, win them over to you. That's profound. It's almost like he's saying, God, I know these people are plotting against us. I know they hate us, and I know their intent is to annihilate Israel, but before anything else, let them see you. Let them know your power and your mercy. And when you consider the modern context, it hits even harder. Today, Israel faces rocket attacks, terror plots, and international pressure. But alongside that, there's also been this spiritual awakening, a revival of sorts, happening among the Jewish people. Well, thousands have been returning to the Western Wall, seeking God, repenting, praying, and acknowledging him in ways that haven't been seen for decades. And Asaph's prayer speaks right into that moment. Protection paired with the hope that even the enemies might turn to God. What's striking is that Asaph doesn't hide the intensity of the threat. He names the nations, describes their conspiracies, and talks about their desire to obliterate Israel. But even in the face of such danger, he prays first for their salvation. That's a lesson in perspective. It's hope layered with realism. He's fully aware of the danger, yet he chooses to lift up a prayer for transformation, not just retribution. And that's the kind of thing that feels so relevant today, especially as people witness miraculous events protecting Israel, rockets intercepted, terrorist plots thwarted, leaders neutralized. It's as if the modern events echo the ancient psalm. Israel is preserved, God's hand is seen, and there's still this call for hearts to turn. And here's the human side of it. When you think about it, it's so easy to get caught up in anger and frustration at enemies, right? In Asaph's shoes, he could have just prayed for destruction, for vengeance. And yes, he does include that, but it's almost a last resort, a final clause in his prayer. The main focus, or the one that opens the psalm's emotional and spiritual heart, is for the enemies to recognize God. And that's huge. It's a reminder that hope and divine justice are intertwined. Protection comes, yes, but the ultimate desire is restoration and turning hearts. Now, fast forward to today. You look at Israel and you see amazing resilience, technological defense systems, and people surviving attacks that should have been devastating. But at the same time, there's a massive revival happening. Tens of thousands of Jewish people are gathering, praying, and seeking God with a renewed intensity. And when you tie that back to Psalm 83, it's like Asaph's vision is unfolding, the nation is being protected, and hearts are being drawn to God. Even amidst conflict, there's this spiritual momentum, this reminder that divine plans are bigger than the immediate threats. And that's where the hope really hits home. Asaph models a way of responding to conflict that isn't just fear or aggression. He prays for protection, of course, but he also prays for redemption, for transformation. It's reflective, it's hopeful, and it's human. He acknowledges the reality of danger, but doesn't let it consume the narrative. Instead, he points to a higher outcome, that even enemies might one day seek the Lord. And when you think about it, that's a perspective that's deeply needed today. In a world of escalating conflicts, political maneuvering, and relentless threats, holding on to the idea that hearts can change and that God's justice is paired with mercy is, well, profoundly grounding. So, when we reflect on Psalm 83 in the context of modern Israel, there's this incredible parallel. The nation faces existential threats. Much like in Asaph's time, there are coalitions plotting, attacks being carried out, and high stakes all around. And yet, the outcomes, miraculous defenses, intelligent successes, the neutralization of key threats, mirror the divine protection Asaph prayed for. And overlaying that with the revival of people returning to God, it's almost like the psalm is alive in the present. And the enemies are still there, threats are real, but the focus on turning hearts, seeking God first, and aiming for restoration before destruction, that's the message that continues to resonate. And here's another thing that's worth noting. Asaph's prayer isn't passive. It's active, intentional, and full of faith. He's acknowledging the conspiracy, he's aware of the danger, and yet he lifts a petition for divine intervention and transformation. It's not wishful thinking, it's a deep trust that God can act, protect, and guide both Israel and its adversaries toward his will. And that's something you can see echoing in the current revival in Israel, the combination of protective action and spiritual awakening, both working simultaneously. People are experiencing survival, miracles, and at the same time, hearts are being drawn to God in ways that are powerful and visible. So, to wrap this up, the ending of Psalm 83 offers a deeply human, reflective, and hopeful model for how to respond to threats. Yes, pray for protection, because threats are real, but don't stop there. Pray for transformation, for hearts to turn, and for divine justice to be tempered with mercy. And when you tie that to modern events in Israel, the miraculous defense, the thwarted attacks, and the revival occurring among the people, you start to see the psalm come alive in our times. It's an invitation to hope, to see God's hand at work, and to remember that even in the face of overwhelming opposition, there is a path for hearts to change, for lives to be preserved, and for restoration to occur. And that, honestly, is a message worth holding on to today. So, as we wrap this up, take a moment to reflect on everything we've seen, Israel facing real threats, miraculous protection, and the timeless words of Psalm 83 coming alive today. It's a reminder of hope, resilience, and the possibility of hearts turning even in the toughest circumstances. If this story gave you a new perspective, stick around for more insights, and consider hitting that like button or subscribing to stay updated on these unfolding events. There's more to learn, and the story is far from over.